What's up, everybody? Are you stuck trying to read the Enchiridion and you can't get through it, or you just don't want to read it and watch a video? You're in the right place. Because today we're going to talk about the Enchiridion by Epictetus in episode 111 of the Existential Stoic podcast.
Ooh, a very auspicious episode.
Yeah. Isn't it lucky when they're all in a row like that or something? Or you make a wish? Or that's the clock.
Gotta be.
That's the clock.
It's gotta
something.
be.
I know it is. Mm-hmm. It always is, right?
Yeah.
I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny.
So we're doing another book people should read, but not read, but watch, so that it can help them out, right? I think it's a good program. It is.
Some people like to read books. Me personally, when I was in school, whenever I was assigned a book, I resisted reading it. So I totally understand anybody out there who would prefer to watch a video instead of actually reading the book, because I think you can get the same content and you can participate in the same discussions in class, and everybody will think you read the book. Because
I know, I was gonna say I always read other books, not the ones that were assigned. Yeah, it's like whatever. Yeah, it's helpful. Oh, I meant to. I'll mention to you later, I guess. Remember, actually, I'm mentioning. Who cares? It's okay. It's sort of not relevant, but it's sort of relevant. Remember when we were talking about earlier this week? This was an earlier conversation about the point of life and trying to find that purpose. Mm-hmm. Well, I think so here's my answer. I've thought about this a lot, and I wanted to give it to you anyway. So whatever, everybody can hear it. From my perspective, I don't think there is one, because I think all of this is a construct. It's all fake, right? It's all meanings we make up, right? That certain sneakers are important, or that certain shows matter, whatever. Everything's made up. It's all just made up meanings, and that's why I was saying, I think from the existential point of view, you have to create meaning, and I think a lot of that's tied to goals, because it's through those that we have longer term meaning, that then gives meaning to all the actions that are, necessary to get there. Does that make sense better? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that have to do with the Enchiridion?
No, not at all. Nothing. Not even a little. I just thought I'd throw it in there for fun.
2 minutes and we're off topic already. But yeah, life. I totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I just think that's the most reasonable one. But anyway, it's not it kind of does. Enchiridion is about living a good life. That's the point of it. So in a sense, it is about purpose. And you could argue too, if you really want to get down to it, you could argue it is about giving yourself purpose by having a larger goal.
Well, and also I do remember one of the parts in there was don't be concerned about what other people have. And this is one of the big obstacles that people have in living a good life now. Because so many people have this false mental model that when I get that, or when I'm that, or when I have this much money, or marry this attractive of a person, or whatever it is, at that point I'll be happy. But up until then, I'm going to be miserable up until that point there. And then they get in such a habit of being miserable that once they get the thing they want, they're miserable anyways, because there's another thing more than that.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so true too. It's I remember in grad school, a bunch of friends that were going to be lawyers, and they're like, yeah, I'll just work 70, 80 hours a week, and then I'll retire. I'll have a bunch of money. I'll do whatever I want. I was like, that doesn't make any sense, because you're going to just condition yourself to work all this time every week and then just stop. You're going to be miserable, but they'll figure it out.
Dude, I've done the same thing, working 80 plus hours a week. And then once you save up all the money to where you can take a vacation, you have nothing to do and you're bored out of your mind. I've been there.
And you get depressed and stuff because you think you're not doing things. But we're so off topic again a little bit.
All right, so
let's back up.
Back to the Enchiridion. Should we even start the episode over again? That's just
no. Just leave this. I like this. Okay. I think it's nice. It's a nice sort of segue into it. People can find it. Look, if they're really worried, I was gonna say I'd give them the time of where we start, but I don't even know what the hell it is, so it doesn't matter.
Start right now when you see us waving our hands in the air. Start right now.
Put it in the show notes.
Right.
So the Enchiridion by Epictetus. This is a classic, this is a classic Stoic work. It's an important work of philosophy. Just so people know, it's funny, ever since of Adventure Time, I always think of the Heroes book and that now whenever I hear the Enchiridion instead of the actual handbook, right? So that means handbook or guidebook, something along those lines. And it's interesting. So, Epictetus is an interesting character too. He was a slave. he ends up becoming, essentially a great Stoic teacher. He has Roman emperors and stuff going to visit him to actually, hear from him. So, I mean, he's an interesting character all around, I think, and his life's really interesting. But, Stoicism, I think, is also interesting, too, because at the heart of it, the goal is just to live a good life by being virtuous. I mean, I think that's sort of the central core of Stoicism. And it differs from, look, pretty much every thinker back then was a virtue ethicist, right? But like Aristotle, for instance, thought, to have a good life, it's not just being virtuous. You also need things, other stuff. You need good friends, you need money, you need sometimes political position can help, stuff like that. So some sort of like social, economic position. Epictetus did not think that. They thought that, everyone has the potential to live a good life. It doesn't matter about the stuff in the world. It's within your power entirely because it's all about virtue. It's all about character development.
Yeah, and I think that's a very notable point, that he was a slave. And even though he didn't have the best life situation, he was still able to make the most of it and to really focus on the things that were in his control. So like being born a slave, or being however he ended up being a slave, that was something completely out of his control. But he was able to take what was within his control and make the best of it, which is probably one of the first points of the Enchiridion, which is some things are in your control, some things are not in your control. Don't worry about the things not in your control and focus on what's in your control.
It is like the first point made like over and over again too for quite a bit of time. It's kind of, but I think, it's funny because I think a lot of people that do Stoicism, focus on that, and it can seem redundant, but at the same time, it is a really important point. And it's one I think that we often don't fully understand or fully grasp what it means. It's easy to be like, yeah, some stuff's in my control, some stuff's not. And then totally just disregard that when you do everything, right? And I think it's important to really understand what does that mean? What is in my control?
Well,
tell me.
So for instance, we have this, there's this whole self-help area of the books. It's basically like all of YouTube, all of the bookstore is self-help. That's like the biggest trend nowadays. And what is it? It's like getting a better body, making more money, making people like you. And it's like all of these things are really out of your control.
Yeah.
They're completely out of your control. You're like, but if I work really hard on it, I can grind, I can work, I can make more money, and I can get really fit if I just eat 1 can of tuna fish and an apple a day and work out 6 hours a day. And yes, some things are in your control a little bit, but you don't know if you're going to get hit by a bus tomorrow. It's just these things are all out of your control. So then what is in your control?
Well, you know what? I like the way you said that too, and the connection to all this self-help stuff, because it is important, because, it's like in Epictetus, we find like a very clear sort of, I think, depiction of the fact that you can do your best. You can do the best you possibly can, and things still might not work out. But that's not a reason to get upset. I think what I've always liked about Epictetus, or admire about it, is within this dichotomy of control is the idea that if you do your best, that's all you can do, and that's okay. And that you shouldn't expect anything beyond that, because everything else is going to be determined by other things. So in other words, like, if you have an important job interview coming up, you can do research, you can, prepare, you can dress nice, you can be on time, you can do all these things that are within your power because they relate to your actions, your thoughts, your skills, your preparation. But getting the job is entirely up to the people that are doing the hiring. So even if you do everything right, you still may not get it. But to think that that's a flaw on your part, and I think this is what's important, and this is where it does get hard, right? Is that if my thoughts, my actions, basically everything intentional is within my power, within my control, then I also have to ask myself, when things don't work out, did I not do my best? Did I fail to do all the things I could have done? And then I can learn from each situation, right, as I progress forward. But because I think it tells us a lot of things. It tells us about, one, how can we best improve ourselves? What's within our power? And two, what should we not react to or overreact to because it's just something that happened in the world, right? I think like things are going to happen. There might be a storm and we might lose power or something. And to get mad at that, it's like, well, it's totally out of my control, right? I can do things. I could light a candle. I could, do other things that might help me do whatever I'm trying to complete or take actions. But there's certain stuff that I just can't really, can't do anything about.
Yeah, there was, I think it was in Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. I heard him say something along the lines of, pray like it's 100% up to the universe, but act like it's 100% up to you. And that stuck with me, because that goes to show that, like,
I like that, yeah.
Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but it's only going to happen if you're in the right place at the right time, because you've been putting in the work and preparing and all that stuff. And I think we see that all the time, how people get totally bent out of shape because Zuckerberg was a billionaire in his teens, and same thing with Justin Bieber. And we're like, oh, they're so lucky. I mean, if I had that opportunity, I would be a billionaire. And it's like, you didn't have that opportunity because you weren't singing all the time, or because you weren't creating Facebook. Go make that opportunity. And then, then when the chance comes, you'll be ready for it. But I think a lot of people get bent out of shape because they think that this stuff comes without the actual work getting put in.
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Is like recognizing that, like, even if the world provides the chances for you, unless you're doing the stuff and doing it right, it won't matter anyway. So I think the dichotomy of control is important too, because it really is about that, what do I need to do to be my best self? What does that look like? And obviously, that's all tied to character and virtue. And then how does that then play out in the world when I'm presented with opportunities and stuff? I'll be more likely to take advantage of them. I'll be more likely to do the things that I want to do and live the life that I want to live if I'm in control of myself. And if I'm not responding, I think that's the other part too, right? It's literally like we lose control of ourselves when we're responding to these things in certain ways when we have no way to really, dictate what happens.
So we've talked about the things that are outside of our control, like all of these externals out here, all these things that we want to achieve. Some things that are in our control, things like our thoughts, the way we react to situations, our perspective, our values.
Yeah. I think it's important probably to point out that, right, the virtuous person is really like the rational, deliberative person, right? So really within our control, think of like your rational self and being a rational self, right? Being rational all the time. That would be like the extent of being in control, right? Being deliberative, making choices, thinking for yourself, thinking clearly, having reasons, all of that, right? Not acting on impulses or, even desires, because they can be outside of our control, right? They can be things that are kind of like society can, in a sense, push on us in a way, right? Or, even emotions can be problematic in that sense.
Well, there's a problem that humans are emotional creatures.
Yeah.
How do we be rational?
But in that, it's funny, you see this, I think a lot of the ancient philosophers, actually I shouldn't say that, a lot of philosophers emphasize, right? Reason is like kind of like the virtuous life, the good life, the ethical life, whatever you want to phrase it. And you might have issue with this. We are emotional creatures, but I think part of it is it's not that you're not sort of letting your emotions sort of be experienced, but that it's a healthy expression of those emotions because they're guided by reason. Maybe think of it like that, right? Instead of just like letting your anger boil over and doing something stupid because you're angry or jealous, right? Or instead of letting your happiness and excitement overwhelm you, so you end up like blowing all your money at the casino because you're excited or something, right? Like instead of letting those things happen, it's like you're expressing those emotions tampered with reason so that you still have control of yourself even with the healthy expression of them. Maybe a good way to think of it would be like, if a loved one dies and you're experiencing grief, letting yourself experience it, doing it in a healthy way, and also not letting everything else fall apart around you just because you're grieving, right? So still having that self-control, that balance.
Yeah. So talking about a loved one, he even mentioned in the Enchiridion, if you're hugging a person, remember you're hugging a human, they'll eventually die. And also, when you lose something, don't think that you're losing it. Think that you're just returning it to whence it came.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, but I mean, those are good points, because it's like we hear about this a lot in Buddhism, this idea of like, the glass is already broken, or just understanding the nature of things, that like
Yeah,
things, they come and they go. And so basically seeing that, and particularly seeing that with people, like it can be difficult to lose people who you care about a lot, and it sucks. But on
yeah,
the one hand, yeah, it stinks to lose them, but on the other hand, do you ever really lose them? Like, I know a lot of people that uh that have died, that are still, I still consider them within me. Like, they're not lost to me. They're still a part of me. I've become a person because of who the influence they were in my life, and I still feel like almost as close to them now as I did when they were alive. So I think that there's understanding that part of human nature allows you to really almost see your own humanity too, because someday I'm going to be that to somebody, you know?
yeah. Well, no, I like what you said though too, because it's like appreciating the time you have with them, valuing that, recognizing their influence in your own development, your own life, and so a part of them is always with you; it'll never go away. But I think also too, Epictetus is pointing out that we have this tendency as humans, right, to want to look at the world and pretend like things will never change. We have a tendency to resist change. We have a tendency to try to fix things, even the way we talk about stuff. When we use names and stuff, it implies this sort of like longevity, this like immutability, right? And I think part of what he's trying to suggest too is like, look, being a good person and living a good life is also recognizing the way the world actually is, that things change, things will pass away. It's like a cycle, it's a process. And if you admit that, you're more equipped to deal with it, right? I think part of it is just admitting these things that are a part of reality rather than just denying them and then being blindsided when they actually happen, right? Which doesn't mean, I mean, and I think he would have absolutely gotten upset if somebody suffered an immediate loss or an unexpected loss. But at the same time, right, you can also approach it very differently. And I think a lot of this is about that balance and a healthy sort of approach to it, right? By understanding the real nature of things.
Yeah. And another thing he talks about is how you should value character above all else. And I think losing people, losing things that you really like or enjoy, or having difficult life experiences definitely build character. And
Yeah.
it's going through those difficult times. It's never fun when you're in it. Like 100%. I sympathize with everybody who's going through a difficult situation, because it is never fun when you're in the middle of it. But once you're through it, you can look back and be like, oh, yeah, that was worthwhile because I learned this. I'm stronger, I'm better, I can handle it better this time. Now I can help other people who are going through that stuff. So like afterwards, it's always good. But one thing that I got from Les Brown was he said, don't say you're having a bad day, say you're having a character building day. And that's something whenever life is being like, I'm just like, people are like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm having a character building day today.
Yeah.
Because it is something, because it like, life wasn't meant to be easy. They did some tests in a biodome a long time ago, where they had trees in a biodome, and the trees grew up really tall. And then they found out that like once they grew up really tall, they would all just fall over. All the trees in the biodome kept growing up tall and then falling over. And they actually found out, because there was no wind pushing against the trees, they just didn't grow
Ah,
out their roots very, very wide. And so
they
because of
didn't
that,
have the resistance to.
yeah,
Yeah.
as soon as they grew up tall, they would just fall over because they didn't have the strength. And it's the same type of thing in life, where like if we don't have to deal with all these difficulties, then we just don't get strong. As soon as something comes, we fall over. But the more we deal with difficulties, the more character we build, the stronger we are for handling those type of situations.
What I love about examples like that is it makes total sense, both why they didn't realize it and why they should have realized it. You know what I mean? Like it makes total sense why it happened, but like also like who would have thought of that at the
Yeah,
outset?
right.
Like so they grow out. They're not
Yeah.
just growing like one stupid direction. That's really funny, actually. That makes total sense. I like that too. It's a good example. I think this is part of it too. Is like you can point to nature and find great examples of all of this. I know with like growing plants and stuff and getting good like vegetables or good like good produce and stuff, like part of it sometimes does involve like giving them some sort of like something, some sort of resistance or some sort of like, what do they call it?
Stressor.
I can't think of the right one. Yeah, stressor. There we go. To stress them out a little bit because then they respond the right way. Like you get hotter peppers, stuff like that, whatever. But I think we can learn from that because it's true, right? Our character is really in large part developed in response to what we have to overcome. And if we're not faced with anything, we don't really grow as people, and we aren't forced to make changes, or we're not given the opportunity to make changes, right? Let me ask you this though. So he does, right? He thinks character is essential. I mean, Epictetus falls under the, that group of philosophers that think eudaimonia is the goal, right? The flourishing life. That's the good life. And he thinks character is really the central feature of that, that if you develop character, you live a good life. What do you think of that? I mean, why do you think the focus just on character? Because I've always found this interesting, right? That, like he doesn't deny other stuff, right? I mean, and he even calls them, I think he calls them what, like indifference at one point too, where like, some of the externals are not good or bad. They might be like, do you know the correct phrasing? He says, what are they, like positive indifference or something like that? Whatever. Externals that like we all kind of want. They're not bad, but they're not like, you can't assume that you'll get them. So it's interesting because I think they recognize the value of some of those things. Obviously, like it's good to have like a good, good shelter and clothing or whatever that can be helpful. But why just focus on character, you think?
So I think that character is something that that you can take with you. I think it's kind of going back to the idea of only focusing on what's within your control. So character is something that is within your control. So for instance, if I work very hard to be a truthful person, then wherever I go, I'm going to be truthful. And we've talked about this before in other episodes, how we've traveled the world and we always think that, when we go to this new place, I won't have my problems there. And then when we get there, we're always happily, pleasantly surprised to find wherever you go, there you are, all your problems and everything. And so, it's something that's right. It's portable. You can take it with you. Whereas some of these other things, like having money isn't bad. Having money is pretty nice. However, a lot of money can be burdensome for a lot of people. And also, the more money you have, the more fear you have of losing money. And if you can't manage having a few dollars, what makes you think you can manage having a lot of dollars? So like there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. But working on character is things that you can apply to any aspect of your life. You never ever reach the ideal, but you can keep coming closer and closer and closer. And so it's kind of like a lifelong process, and it benefits you and it also benefits society, which I think goes back to the kind of like Stoic idea of the cosmopolis, where you should be doing for the best you can to help out society as well. And so that is something where if you are a virtuous person, if you build up your character, you're not only going to be an awesome person, like you're going to love spending time with yourself. Other people are going to love spending time with you, but also you're going to be making such a big impact in society that, when you go and pass on, other people are going to be pretty bummed.
There you go. Yeah, I think you made a lot of good points too. And I'm glad you brought that up too. The idea that, by being your best self, you also can be an example, right, for others. So you become an example, but you also that's part of everything you do, right? By having right character, developing your character, it's literally you, right? It's your life. You're focusing on what you have the power to actually control and make better, and to actually develop yourself. And I think that's really what's crucial. He's talking about, I think at the end of the day, Epictetus is talking about living an intentional life, living your own life and living the best life you possibly can. And he sees the means of doing that through character development and this idea of sort of really cultivating, you might say, the right type of character, being the right type of person, which I like. I've always liked that idea. I think it's interesting because it puts it within your hands, right? A lot of times, like I think, like for instance, like the United States conception of a good life, it's a big house, lots of money, all this stuff that I think in a lot of respects makes a lot of people feel like it's inaccessible simply because they didn't have a certain starting point, or they didn't have certain access to certain things that might have made it easier. And I like what Epictetus says because, and from his standpoint, it doesn't matter where you are in life. You have this ability to live this good life. It's within you, and it's all about you. It doesn't involve all this other stuff, right? And I like that idea because it really does make it, it makes it more achievable and understandable in a broad sense, I think.
It's accessible to anybody, and that's why I think it's so important for people to read this and to understand. He was a slave. Like we don't have slaves that many places in the world anymore. Like, but he was a slave, and granted, they treated slaves pretty well back then. But he was still somebody's property, and they could still beat him when they felt that
they still broke his legs. I mean, yeah. I don't know if it was like, how good it was.
So like he didn't have a great life situation, but what he found was that it's accessible to anybody, and he could actually live a very, very good life. And it's kind of, I look at it kind of like a big FU to like society and everything out there, because it's like, do what you want to me. I'm still gonna live the best life I can. Huh.
Well, and it's up here that matters, right? It's like he recognized, like, yeah, I have my body, things can happen to my body. I might even become, because after his legs and all, you might even become a little like not as physically able as you were before. But ultimately what matters is your head, right? How you think, the way you look at the world, your perspective. And that really is ultimately what matters, and what dictates whether or not you have a good life, a flourishing life. And I mean, I've always admired that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, so I mean, talking about this stuff, this is a different mindset than a lot of people have, and a different mindset than a lot of people are taking on. And so in the Enchiridion, he says, be prepared to be laughed at. And also he says, don't brag about your principles. Like, don't feel like you need to make everybody else do this just because you're doing this. I think that's one big mistake that a lot of people make, is they always think that, like, because I believe this, everybody else needs to believe this. This is one reason why I can't, why I like literally am so bored of politics, because everybody's like, I believe this, so you have to believe this. And it's like, I really don't care. But
yeah, they don't want to have a conversation. They just want to tell you how they're right. Yeah, it's like whatever.
but he says, be prepared to be laughed at. Just be true to yourself. So if this works for you, great. If this doesn't work for you, still great. And just realize that it is a journey. It's going to take a while, and if this is something that you really want, you can achieve it, but everything has a price, and you have to be willing to pay that price. And being a person of character is difficult. It can be difficult.
It can be hard, and it's lifelong, right? I'm glad you brought that up too, that like, be prepared to be laughed at. One of my favorite things Nietzsche always says too is that we need to like be more capable of laughing at our own foolishness, not taking ourselves so seriously. And I think Epictetus would have appreciated that as well, by recognizing that like, this is something I'm doing, but I shouldn't take myself so seriously that I should believe just because I'm doing it, it's right for everyone, because people are different. And even if, like, look, you and I both might be trying to work on our character, but that might look a little different because we're different. We're different people. We're in different situations in life. We're in different places. We're different, so it's like how that is realized in actuality might appear different, or might involve different sort of, steps, practices, reasoning. And so it'd be absurd to sort of, think that should be done by everybody. And we see that a lot now, right? Like virtue signaling and stuff, this idea. And a lot of that too is also motivated by other things, I think. But like, trying to tell people how great you are and all. And it's like, you're making yourself look silly, one. And two, you're taking yourself way too seriously, that you're not really going to develop in the right way. Because part of this is also recognizing where you need to sort of back up and maybe change things. It's a constant state of development. If you take yourself too seriously, you'll fail to see those sort of chances where you can change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that now is an auspicious time in the world for people to be, because Stoicism has also become a very popular subject nowadays. And it's funny because it's kind of like on the exact opposite spectrum of where it seems like everything is headed with technology and social media and everything. This idea of Stoicism, because like social media seems like it's, pretend to be somebody you're not. so that other people
all the time.
so that other people will give you likes so you can feel good about yourself. Whereas stoicism is like, don't even worry about other people. Just be true to yourself, live the best life that you can. It reminds me of John Wooden, who was a basketball coach. For UCLA, he won something. He was the only person to win it both as a player and a coach into the Hall of Fame. I think it was something like that. But
you can say whatever you want. I have no idea, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but he basically he never talked with his players about winning. All that he ever said was, "Do the best you can. Do the best that you can. And when it comes time to look at the score, if you did the best that you can, there's a good chance you'll like the score. But don't be concerned with the score." And as a coach, he actually focused on fundamentals. He spent a whole practice teaching guys how to put on their socks properly so they wouldn't get blisters, and it's like things that we don't think about. But like nowadays we're so like concerned with these crazy convoluted theories of how everything works that we completely miss out on the fundamentals, and we completely miss out on just doing the best we can with what we've got. Like everybody wants to do something, they've got to go out and buy all the equipment and take all these courses, and it's just like, just do the best you can with what you got. You'll get there eventually.
You will. Yeah. I like that too, because it's so true. It's like, we get so caught up in focusing on the end and how other people are doing it that we forget that if you focus on your character, on the fundamentals, you bring it with you everywhere. So you have the stuff within you to do whatever. Like you'll have the discipline, you'll have the perseverance, you'll have the ability to calmly approach stuff and actually deal with it and solve problems when you need to. And you'll be able to overcome all the things you face. And I think that's the bigger point of it too, which is like that flourishing life is learning how to overcome the things you encounter in life, learning how to be your best self. And that means you have to work on yourself. But we all want to get their shortcuts, right? We all want the easy way. And it's like, well,
the hack, the quick fix. Yeah. Who makes these quick fixes?
Who makes up all these life hacks, right? No, and it's like, and I think it's funny because like, on a certain hand, it's like, well, you can shortcut your way there, but you're just going to fail later because you haven't developed all the things you need to actually do it right. And I think, that's why that's why it was a lifelong endeavor to do this,
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day. It brings up a good point because everybody wants to get somewhere else and they want to get there fast. Like everybody wants to be a millionaire now, and everybody wants to, have the perfect body now and have the car and the house now and have the perfect spouse now. And it's like, I think we're missing out on actually realizing what's happening now. And I think that's the biggest problem, because where we are is right now, we're in a state of discomfort and we don't like it. And so we think that by getting this other thing, the discomfort will go away. That may or may not be true. But we think that once we get to this new place, we won't have that discomfort anymore. And while it may happen, there's a greater chance it won't happen. Or even if it does happen, within a few weeks or months, you'll be right back where you were anyways, because you've built up the habit of being uncomfortable. So kind of focusing, we've talked about this before, and I like one of my habits is just recognizing that mindset that when I get this, then I'll be happy. I flip it. I say, when I get happy, then I'll get this. So that way it just reminds me to like be happy where I am in the journey, because that's what most of it is anyways, this journey to get where we're going. Like the journey comes before the destination, and like the journey is 99% of it. The destination is 1%. But everybody focuses on that 1%, and we miss out on like the biggest life experiences we had.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it. It's like, look, I think like I've studied ethics, and I think so many of the theories, that's pretty much at the heart of it, right? Is that it's the journey that matters. It's this long process of development. And like, it's, I think crucially, and this is true for Epictetus too, it's within your power because it is your life. You're talking about yourself, right? And I think, it's important to recognize. It's funny, we all want a shortcut. We all want to jump to the end. And like you said too, a lot of us want things to change because we're in discomfort, but we identify something that we think will help quickly, and all we do is we get caught in a cycle of discomfort and a quick fix discomfort, quick fix, right? Where you keep trying to get out of it, you're basically kind of like pleasure seeking in a way. It's almost like a hedonistic, what do they call it? A hedonistic treadmill or whatever. Hedonic treadmill.
And not only that, but by like when we're in this discomfort and we try and find something to get out of this discomfort, we don't realize all the problems that come along with that.
Oh yeah.
Like how many people don't like where they are, so they go get a fancy new car and a big house, but now they have this giant car payment and they have this giant house payment, and now they have to work 2 jobs to afford this car and this house, so they never spend any time in the house, and they don't spend most of the time in the car anyways because they're just stuck in traffic on the way to work and they hate going. So it's kind of like realizing that everything has a price. And
no, I think that's crucial. That's a good point, right? Is like taking that time to really think things through, to understand what you actually, well, this is also knowing what you want, right? And if you work on yourself and you know yourself, you'll also make the right decisions regarding what you want and what's valuable. I think we get into so much problems, when we try and cure our depression by purchasing things, like that whole mentality, which is so consumerist, and it makes sense, it feels good in the moment, but we lose interest in those things. We're wasting money, we're putting ourselves in a worse situation, and we're not recognizing the cost associated with the actions that we're doing at all. And I think, it can be hard. I think this is also why a lot of people struggle with Stoicism and philosophies like this that recommend character development, because they're difficult. They, unfortunately, like, even when you think you're making progress, a lot of times you have to back up and start over or reassess things. It's constant sort of self-reflection and sort of, evaluation to determine like what you need to do better, how you can do better. It's constantly working at it because we're people and we're going to fail all the time. Like it's easy to forget things when we're out in the world doing things, when things just happen. And so a lot of times, I think what people don't realize is your best lessons when you're trying to, especially when you're first starting out, they don't come from practicing. They actually come from recognizing where you failed, by reflecting on how something went wrong, on how you didn't exercise character in a certain situation, and then figuring out what that looks like so you can do it in the future. And it's a long process. And I think it's just, it's difficult and it's not as exciting and fun as sometimes just going out and solving our problems with purchasing and immediate quick gratification.
You made a good point there with mistakes, because in school we're indoctrinated that mistakes are bad. You're not allowed to make mistakes, but that's not how life is. It turns out that life is actually totally cool to make mistakes. Actually, you're going to make a ton of them. Mistakes are totally awesome, but it's unacceptable to not learn from your mistakes, because then you're just going to keep repeating them again and again and again. And I think that is probably a bigger lesson that people need to learn than what they learn in school. Mistakes are bad. Mistakes are awesome. They're like the best way to learn. Yeah. I heard Michael Jordan, from some guy was learning skiing from the same guy who taught skiing to Michael Jordan, the all-star basketball player. And Michael Jordan, every time the instructor told him something that he was doing, every time the instructor pointed out one of his mistakes, he like reveled in it. He loved it. He saw that like, oh, now I have this new way that I can actually get better. And that's so completely different from how a lot of people take on mistakes. They're like, oh, that's my mistake. Okay, I'll try and hide that so he doesn't see that now. And it's like, instead, that mistake is like the stepping stone to you becoming better, if you choose to learn.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, right. If you have somebody pointing out a mistake to you who knows what they're doing, right? They're really, that's why having good examples, good role models to follow is great, because it's almost like having a little bit of a shortcut to help you out by identifying more quickly things that you can work on specifically that can help you develop, right? Just like in that case, right? If he figures out like, oh, this is a mistake I'm making in skiing. If I really work on that, I solve that problem, I'm going to be better, right? And right there, because somebody who's skilled and a professional points it out. And I think it's a great way to look at it, and we have to be that way with ourselves in a sense, which is hard. I think that's, why a lot of people struggle with it. But I think, it's also a really interesting theory, and I get its popularity because it does, at least when things feel so out of control, it really gets us to focus on what is within our control, to go back to that dichotomy, right? And to really see that, things might seem crazy, but there is this one, it is our life still. And we have the power to live it how we want.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I would encourage everybody who has been assigned to read the Enchiridion just to go out and read it, because it's not that long of a book. It's a pretty
No.
easy read, and it's actually really interesting. I mean, I do feel like he repeats himself over and over again, which may seem a bit tedious, but also it's good for reinforcing those principles that you hear them again, like the idea that some things are in your control and some things are out of your
Yeah.
control, that you should value character above everything else, that you should be true to yourself. Like these things he brings up over and over and over again. But the good idea with them is that, like, by hearing them over and over and over again, maybe you'll listen to them this time.
Yeah. I'd actually encourage, I mean, you can literally, it's not that long. You can read it fairly quickly. I would encourage people even to just like take it a couple pages at a time and reread them a couple times, and don't try and read through the whole thing at once, because it's just kind of like muddies it. But I think if you do a couple at a time, you can really kind of, it's broken up in a nice way for that. And it's a pretty easy read in that sense, but it is a really interesting book. And I think, it's, at the very least, it gets you thinking about things that are crucial for living a good life by someone who literally spent his whole life thinking about this and trying it. And I mean, I think there's value in that. Even if you don't agree with everything, there's value in it.
And also, I think that it's really important for people who think that they're stuck in some situation in life that isn't fair.
Oh God, yeah.
It's really important, because this is a guy who was a slave. His master broke his leg, like Danny said. And so, like, he didn't have a good situation, and yet he was still able to have a good outlook and a good life. So wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, it's possible that you can also have a good life as well.
Yeah. And the best we can always do is doing our best. I mean, that's what matters. The outcomes are not necessarily in our power, right? But we can always control how good we do. I like that. I think that covers it pretty well. If you listen to this, I think you'll have a good sense of, you can talk about the Enchiridion if you need to by Epictetus, but you can also, it'll give you a good background too to kind of get into it if you want,
You can totally fool your professor, have him thinking you've read the whole book.
Damn right. That's what matters. Well, thanks for joining us. It's episode 111 of the Existential Stoic podcast. If you guys are watching on YouTube, click notification, subscribe. It helps us out. Share. And check us out on all the podcast apps. You can download whatever, listen, subscribe. It really helps. Share it with some friends. We'll be back in the midweek with another quick fix. And until then, later, Randy.
Later, Danny.